Okay, well, I think it's probably about time to get started. So, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this, the second in our series of CPD webinars for this academic year. I'm Helen, Education Resources Lead here at First News, and my colleagues Daisy and Rue, and I think Kate are here as well. Oh, there you go, saying hello. Hi. And we're delighted to see so many people here today. I won't talk for long because I know that our wonderful presenters, Chen and Lindsay Pickton, have loads to say. I've seen the deck and it is packed. It's packed with information. And they'll struggle to fit it in if I waffle on too much. But there's just a couple of little housekeeping points for me to share with you before they get going. So we would be grateful, please, if you could all stay on mute for now and keep your cameras off. It is not that we don't want you to join in. We very, very much do want you to join in, but there are so many of us here today that the most efficient way to get everyone involved is to make full use of the chat bar at the side. So if you can put your questions and your comments and your thoughts in the chat bar, we'll keep an eye on those as we go along, and we will pick them up certainly at the end. Chris and Lindsay might pick them up as they go through, but they'll probably it'll probably be the end by the time they get round to them, but there will be a time for questions at the end. There we go. That's a thumbs up from Lindsay. And just to confirm for you all that tomorrow you'll be getting an email with a video of this session, which you are welcome to share with colleagues if you found it useful, a copy of the slides as well, a certificate of attendance, and there will be an exclusive offer on First News products, which is just for you guys who've come to this webinar. So keep your eyes open for that email. And that is it for me. Just one more reminder to keep your cameras off and your microphones on mute, please. And I will now hand you over to our fabulous expert presenters, Chen and Lindsay Pickton, for what I know is going to be a fantastic, inspiring session. Enjoy.
There we are. Can you hear us, Helen?
Certainly can.
Great. Okay. Let's go through. Ooh. There we
go. Okay. Should we make a start?
Yeah, let's go.
First of all, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world or in the UK. We're really happy that you've joined us. Thank you so much for sparing your time. We do realise that you'll all be incredibly busy, and to make this time, we do appreciate it, and we hope that you'll find the session useful. It was fantastic to be able to undertake the first session in November. So this is our second session where we're focusing in on non-fiction in the classroom.
And we will be making some reference to things that we covered in November, actually, because we have got a lot to cover and we need to mention some of those things. If you weren't able to access that one, maybe Helen can help you with that if you contact her at the end.
Okay, so we're going to be focusing on practical strategies to teach with news stories, but also trying to generalize some of those strategies to other forms of non-fiction as well. And we really wanted to reiterate throughout that the importance of using trusted sources, especially when we're looking at news, if we're going to be tackling, sometimes quite sensitive areas, important information that children need to be to know about, to make sure that it is trusted and that it's age appropriate as well. So we're just going to first of all introduce you to Charlie. And so Charlie is an amorous monkey. It's almost Valentine's Day after all, so we thought it'd be quite nice to think about him. And just to say that he is not the one, not that escaped monkey from Scotland that was filling the news last week. This is a different one. So let's just enjoy the story first of all. So, a cheeky monkey named Charlie has escaped from his island sanctuary in Ireland, setting off in search of a girlfriend.
The capuchin monkey used to live at Rastrum Monkey Sanctuary, but a couple of weeks ago, while being relocated, he jumped off the boat and ran away.
The sanctuary's owner, Willie Heffernan, has urged locals to keep an eye out for Charlie, who he says is likely to be looking for a mate.
But he warns that the monkey is shy around humans and likely to run or bite if cornered.
As First News went to press, Charlie was still on the loose. So we're going to return to Charlie, but we're just going to return to something that we looked at previously. So the PISA research that showed us, just a reminder really, that data consistently shows that engagement in reading is strongly linked with reading performance.
And whatever the children's background, engagement seems to be the thing that captures children and improve captures, that's harsh, that grabs children and makes a difference to their life chances, their ability to read, and therefore their life chances. And really, you know, what could be more engaging than a frisky monkey making a break for it? I don't know if you found that story quite engaging. We thought it's hilarious. But that's one of the crucial aspects of this. We're talking about the ability to read, of course, and structuring things that are engaging to do, but also just the content, finding stories that are engaging.
And we're going to emphasize this point over and over again, that when we're tackling non-fiction, we need to, you know, actually all types of fiction, we want children to be thinking about reading as readers, first of all. So reading as a reader before we jump into analysis, because when we looked at Charlie, we wanted to find out all about him. What did he get up to? And, you know, that's the emphasis. We enjoy the story first. If we leapt into analysis of features and just kind of, you know, what are the features of a newspaper, we'd definitely be risking children becoming disengaged. So in other words, start by reading as a reader, and that's for all texts.
As Chris says, we'll keep on coming back to that point. And specifically, you know, how to read a newspaper. And this is a bit generalizable, because we just don't read newspapers in the way that we read a lot of books, especially not fiction. Fiction is quite distinct actually, in that you start at the beginning and you work your way through to the end, unless it's, I suppose, a collection of short stories that you can dip in and out of. But broadly speaking, fiction, even very skinny little books that 5-year-olds read, you start at the beginning and you work your way through to the end. Whereas if you're reading reference texts, like one's about dinosaurs or one's about great women, or indeed amazing things like dragonology, you tend not to start at the beginning very much. You tend to flick through and see if a bit grabs you. And actually teaching children that that's okay, because it isn't what you do as an early reader. As an early reader with a scheme book, you start at the beginning and you work through. And actually teaching children the skill, the behaviour of leafing through, is going to be very, very useful to a lot of children, because increasingly they're very unlikely to see parents or carers leafing through a newspaper. Most people who access newspapers nowadays are doing it through their phones or a tablet. So actually the skill of leafing through, visibly leafing through a newspaper, is something that you're going to probably have to model in a way. And then what we tend to do with news stories is we flick through and we choose a bit that grabs our interest, really. And we're going to need to show children that, because as we said, in the early reading stages, it's not what you do at all. You read every single little bit of a book in your early stages of reading, and this is a different model for reading. And having done that, we can structure discussion. So these are just some ideas that we've had, just loose ways, not like SATs questions kind of thing. It's not for assessment, but how to have a discussion about this sort of reading where we haven't all necessarily read the same thing. So what was the funniest or the scariest, the most fascinating, the most important thing that you read? That's quite an interesting idea, isn't it? What do we think is important in the newspaper we've just flicked through? Or what do you want to know more about? Or what do you already know more about? What is there something that you'd like to tell people about? But of course, you know, if you want to know more about something, how are you going to go about that? And what had you already heard about? Maybe, you know, the TV was on, maybe the radio was on when you were driven to school or something. Have you seen something on social media? Has somebody shown you something on social media? Have you heard adults talking about a news story? Has reading about it in this newspaper, like First News, has it changed your view about the thing that you've encountered previously in the week? And actually that taps into something that we're going to talk about in our third webinar early in the summer term, which is about trusting sources, and having a safely curated source like First News to dip into, and how to tell the difference. We're going to talk about that ever so briefly today, but it's going to be a big focus of our third webinar. But what we're trying to get at here is this idea of teaching children a different way of reading, which is very much about newspapers, but also a big part of how we access a lot of reference texts, actually.
Okay. So really, really important to build in that discussion and to structure discussion using questions like those. And really importantly, to ask the question, what grabs you? And if children are not used to leafing through newspapers yet, hopefully they will be getting onto that. But getting them to think about, using quick news, using short bites of short little articles that they may be able to express their preferences about. Because something like this double page spread, quick news here, is fantastic for showing children how we make those choices, and building in some of those discussions that we've talked about, using those questions that might help to structure that discussion. So lots of different choices for the children to make. So what grabs you? I'm sure that question is something you'll already be asking the children. So what grabs you here? So the world news pages are fantastic for that. Obviously, we want the children to be thinking about a world beyond them, to be interested, to be curious about the world beyond them. So what grabs you about the news that's happening all around the world? And something like this is going to really engage the children and help them to make those links with geography as well.
Yeah, I really like those roundup pages. I think it's a very effective way of teaching children how to access reference text and news in a very quick and easy way without actually having to have 30 copies of the newspaper as well, actually. And we should also acknowledge that, over decades, if not longer, I don't know, a lot of people have started a newspaper at the back and worked their way in, because they're more interested in the sport than other forms of news. And we can acknowledge that. We can pay homage to that, because First News follows the tradition, and there is current sports news within it.
Okay, and this, we absolutely loved these pages. So your news, what you said in 2023. So lots of data that's being collated, getting children to think about, actually express their views on some important and very current issues that we think you might like. Definitely fantastic discussion points. So for example, children were asked, have you been taken in by a fake video or news report? And scarily, just look at that pie chart, 43% of children said yes. So that is worth discussing, isn't it? I mean, 57% of them said no, and that, again, would be interesting to discuss. Is that the reality? But this kind of discussion, absolutely fabulous to be delving into, and opening up all sorts of links that we will also be talking about in the third webinar. And we like this one. Don't know if you would think about this. So, would you like to be taught by robots instead of teachers? Well, 45% of children said yes. So we definitely would want to be asking them, what's going on here? Tell us your thoughts behind this. 55% of them said no. So again, let's have a think about what's going into this, and just to make the links with AI, which is obviously a lot of schools are thinking about, and excellent subject for discussion.
So really good kick-off for both of those are a really good kick-off for a debate.
And more seriously, people have been asking us whether First News deals with difficult topics, such as this, and yes, it does, is the answer, and very sensitively. And we're not going to delve into this, but we wanted just to say that, again, that it is really important to have a trusted source if we are going to tackle such sensitive issues, and we need to be well informed. And for children, it's really important that we are using age appropriate sources.
And of course, when we're sharing pages like this, we're aware that a lot of you be thinking, yeah, but I've got children in my class that can't access the text. And we'd say, well, yeah, they possibly can. It might be that they can't access the decoding aspect of it, but they can almost certainly access the comprehension aspect of it. And to be aware that in the English national curriculum, at least, that's something that is flagged up throughout. I mean, you would expect listening comprehension to be a key aspect of years 1 and year 2, key stage 1 in the English curriculum. But in year 3 and 4, it's very clear listening to and discussing a wide range of fiction, poetry, plays, non-fiction and reference books, participating in discussion about things that are read to them, as well as those that they can read for themselves. So the national curriculum is saying as a statutory element, we should be having discussion about non-fiction that is read to children. So even if they can't read the things themselves, reading it aloud as a provocation for discussion would be fantastic. And it doesn't stop there. You know, upper key stage 2 in the English national curriculum, statutory element, participate in discussion about books. We can generalise to newspapers, I'm sure, that are read to them as well as those that they can read for themselves. Participate in discussion. Don't just listen. Actually have discussions, as we were saying. We will come back to say more about structured debate, but it's always worth being aware of this, that even if children can't read all the words, you can use this in a classroom, group, small group, big group, whole class. You can use it just by taxing their listening comprehension if they can't decode the words.
Okay, so teaching reading. We're just going to revisit some of the teaching strategies that we met in our first session. So just love this visual reminder of some of the varied ways that children can be enjoying different texts in different places, and by themselves and in groups. Just all of those varied ways that they can be enjoying their reading in school at the moment.
And just if you're wondering, we started off talking about reading as a reader, and here the big distinction is we are choosing what they read, as opposed to we were talking about making selection, children making choices, and helping children learn how to make choices is a big part of learning to read as a reader. But here we're explicitly imagining the teacher as the driver for the subject matter and the activities. We talked an awful lot in the November webinar about purposeful reading, and particularly purposeful reading of non-fiction across the curriculum. But we just wanted to introduce these key lines.
Yeah, so we just thought it'd be really important to flag up that these are the 3 stated purposes, the really important purposes that First News is about. So, better informed children, fueling curiosity and inspiring debate. And we just kind of think, actually, this is what we want of all children. And so this is what we can make sure happens if we make good use of the resources that we're discussing today.
And the better informed side of things is so crucial to the ability to comprehend reading material, whether you can read the words for yourself or you're listening. We'll keep coming back to that. I'm sure so many of us are now aware that one of the key factors of reading comprehension is knowledge. The more you know, the more you can understand. So we've got to have better informed children. And of course, yeah, who wouldn't want curiosity and inspiration? But all of these things will fuel and increase reading mileage. Again, something we talked a lot about in the November webinar. We're not going to keep going on about it, but a big part of engagement is about increasing the quantity of reading. We need to interest them, and we need to empower them. We need to excite and inspire them, and we need to give them the knowledge that enables them to understand what they're reading, because quantity is important. The amount of time spent with eyes on text in the day, in the week, in the year, how much time is spent reading, because you get good at what you practice. These things are true of any complex skill. How much you do of it, whether it was swimming or riding a bicycle or tying your shoelaces, you get better. Once you've got the basic skills, you just got to do it a lot in order to get really good at it, and that's where we want to get to. And we have got this kind of virtuous circle thing going on here, that the more you read, the better you get at it. The better you get at it, the more likely you are to read. And we have to get children into that virtuous circle, because otherwise there is no flat line. If you're in the vicious circle, you read less, your skills, they may stay still, but everyone else's skills are moving away from you. So in effect, you're going backwards, which means you're going to be reading less, which is not going to encourage you to read more, and on and on and on. So let's take those vicious circles and make them virtuous, empower children, engage them. And again, we talked an awful lot last time about active and purposeful reading. We went through these strategies in quite a lot of detail. We talked about jigsawing, which we won't talk about now. As I say, you'll have to revisit our last session to find out if you're not familiar with these. We talked about jigsawing. We talked about the creation and discussion around coming up with headlines and subheadings for texts, for paragraphs within texts, as a way of summarizing our understanding. But the argument around who's got the best subheading for that paragraph is really good for engagement and just better comprehension anyway. Getting children to create true and false and matching type questions, more of which later, is a really effective, quick and easy way of getting them to read really closely, share their understanding and demonstrate their understanding by creating questions for other children, which also saves you a huge amount of time, because it takes quite a long time to create true and false and matching questions. And then we talked a little bit last time about drama, using certain aspects of drama to explore news stories. We mentioned last time debate, and we've mentioned it already today, but we wanted to dig in a little bit more, because since last time we've become aware of resources that First News produced that are very, very powerful for actually structuring classroom debate.
Okay, so just as an example, we love this one. So should music be taught more in schools? I'm sure that you'll have an opinion about this, and fantastic that there are resources like this one, where here you can see the benefits of music, lots of information that's obviously been researched for the children to use as part of their discussion to inform their opinions. And you can see music in schools. Actually, something like this special report, fantastic for equipping children, not just with opinions, but informed opinions to support discussion in class. So just wonderful that this is here for them.
And the point that Chris just made is so important. Like, debate, a debate without informed opinions is just an argument. It's just people ranting at each other. And actually having pros and cons laid out for you in this way is that this debate isn't done for you. It's just equipping you to really be able to have a debate. And also, what a perfect opportunity to actually teach the difference between fact and opinion, to be able to identify fact and opinion in order to debate the issues raised in an article like this. And First News does more than this. We were amazed at this one when we found this. So we have another starting point question, this one not about music in schools, but we can imagine quite a few children being engaged with a question about gaming, important life skills, not just tech skills, but life skills. So just we haven't even got all of the material here, but just look at this. We've got a history of, and then we've got some issues to consider. And this is pretty serious stuff about the aggression as an aspect of, for some people, but when they game a lot, they become, there's issues around addiction, including actually talking about dopamine. Can you see that? Even the development of RSI, World Health Organization material, research, the importance of moderation. So these are, if we read this, or indeed read this to children, remember that we can read this to children who can't access this for themselves, then they're more equipped. But also we have to weigh up the positives, don't we? That you might learn teamwork, and your decision making and problem solving could improve. Your hand-eye coordination rather, is a fairly obvious one, I guess, from gaming. What about managing money? It hadn't even occurred to me. And maybe getting better with some games at actually coding, which is maybe not a life skill, but a professional skill that we could probably do with more of. And there's more of this. This is just a selection. So you can dip into this or give children the lot, depending on their age and their ability to access text. But I keep saying it, remember, you can read this to children. It doesn't have to be wait until they can read all the words for themselves. And then at the end of all of those pages, you get this sum up. So this is pros and cons, just in a tiny little 3 points for each. Yes, gaming is positive for life skills. No, it isn't. And there's a kickoff for a debate, isn't it? Once you've read all the information, this is not a conclusion, because it's giving you a balance of yes and no. So it's a kicking off point for a debate, which may indeed lead to a piece of writing if you wish. And really, really usefully, we really like this page. Look at these questions, really probing questions on the subject matter to get a whole range of kind of, whether it's to inspire the original question or to go off in offshoots about this, and all of this just within First News to inspire this kind of level of debate is stunning. And look at these questions. So just do you enjoy playing it? What are your favourites? But then, do you find it difficult to stop? That's quite an interesting one to ask, isn't it? Straight away. Would you like to play more or less? Now, isn't that interesting? I wonder how many children in your class would say, actually, I'd like to play less. I've encountered 1 or 2 already. So we think that's an amazing resource to actually kick off debate.
You can actually imagine these resources just kind of actually really thinking about how you'd sequence the sessions, starting potentially with some of these questions to engage the children, and these yes no summaries might be how children access if they're not quite ready for the in-depth discussions, which as Lindsay said, can be shared in a read aloud way in any case, so that children can access those. So really thinking carefully about that sequencing and where the discussion can be built in for the children to really engage.
In the earlier session, we talked in quite a lot of detail about the simple view of reading and this idea of the different kind of pupil groups, if you will, in a simplistic way. But we're not going to talk about that now. We just wanted to raise the distinction between the ability to comprehend language and the ability to read words. Obviously, we want children to be able to do the 2 things at once. Being able to do them at once is one of the crucial reasons why we want children to increase their reading mileage, because the more you do this, the better you get at it. But we wanted to be clear that today's session, we're very heavily focused on the language comprehension side, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to talk about the word reading explicitly, the decoding side of things at all. In fact, it's quite a crucial part of reading things like newspapers.
And we know that a lot of teachers are thinking about are needing to teach decoding, including in juniors and into secondary. And to be honest, decoding happens all the time. Whenever we come when we come across a new word, there's always going to be decoding that needs to happen, because when we encounter new words that we're unfamiliar with, we are relying on our phonics. So just as an example, this word, I wonder if you've ever come across this word before. It's not an alien word, and it's not a nonsense word. And then this one, again, could have been an alien word, could have been a nonsense word.
That sounds like an alien
name. Yeah, both of those. And unless you have a chemistry background, you'll be relying on your phonics and your decoding to be able to read these words. And the interesting thing is that these words appear in one of the articles that we came across, and it could have been from this one or one of these.
Yeah, it could have been actually from any of those, but it actually was in, if you look at the story near the bottom of the page, the answer to this particular crucial question that we now know. And if you scan your eyes down those pages, you'll see bilirubin and neurobilin, amongst other things. There's neurobilinogen, he said, desperately using his phonics. So there's quite a lot of unfamiliar words that you encounter when you're reading non-fiction, particularly technical language, I guess, because those are the ones that you're least likely to have encountered before.
And this is a fantastic explanation and hugely scientific, and a lot of children would be really fascinated. I think we were fascinated.
If you weren't fascinated by Charlie the amorous monkey, then maybe this is the story.
Okay, so we were thinking about ways into comprehending something like this, and obviously it would help to know something about the content matter before delving straight in, because it is quite scientific. But strategies like fastest finger first, you may already be using, so for the children to just as quickly as possible put their finger on a word that is similar, for example, to the meaning of material or element. So we'd say to the children, can you find that word? Fastest finger first. Put your finger on the word that's similar in meaning to material or element. So in this case, it would be substance, for example.
And then the speed retrieve skill, you just posing a question that's a retrieval question, but you're just doing it as a race. So it's like the fastest finger first idea. It's about speed reading, but it's speed reading for meaning. There are various activities out there that we've encountered, and we've probably both tried, and maybe you have as well, in decades past, that are about reading quickly, but not specifically for meaning. And we like the idea of reading quickly for simple meaning, not reading quickly for deepest inference, because deepest inference you get from slow reading, but speed reading for quick retrieval is something that I think we need to practice a lot more of, and then we'll get better at it. Similarly, another vocabulary question: what could we replace revealed with in the first sentence? That's a straight vocabulary question, but then you can push it into deeper territory by asking, so why did the writer choose revealed instead of the word that you selected? And we'll never answer that question for sure without actually asking the writer, but we might have theories about that. And then we're getting into authorial intent and appropriate choices for different text forms. Maybe revealed sounds a bit more formal or even a bit more scientific than other choices that we might have made. And really, just to summarize this idea of developing comprehension and vocab and speed at the same time. Years ago, when we first encountered activities, like probably 20 years ago or something, I like fastest finger first. It was very much who's the first child to put their finger on the word, whatever it is. And you're just looking down the page for that word, but you're not reading for any meaning at all. So if we can practice speed reading for meaning and for vocabulary meaning as well as comprehension meaning by saying things like who's can be the first to get their finger on the word that means or the word that tells us. And obviously you can do that fiction, non-fiction, poetry, no problem at all. Similarly, what other words could work here? When we change that word, how does the meaning change? How does the viewpoint change? So we're actually looking at the meaning of words in context. We're sort of increasingly obsessed with this, that words really only work in context with other words, and we can overdo vocabulary development in isolation when we do, are we going to tell you about this word? But actually words change meaning in the sentences and the paragraphs in which they work. So looking at words in context, and when we swap them out for words that have a very similar meaning, how does that change the text? How does it change the viewpoint, and so on and so on, the authorial intent and so on, but always doing that in the context. And rich texts like Now We Know Why Our Wee Is Yellow will give us opportunities to do that in quite an engaging way, I think. Still me, right? Yeah. Changing gear a little bit. Years and years ago, we came up with this term, the golden thread, as a way of referring to the invisible thing that connects a text, that hints at viewpoint. And we use it as a kind of child-friendly way of doing things. Much later, we encountered, or we discovered that Michael Rosen, the amazing poet Michael Rosen, refers to, in the context of poetry, he refers to secret string. What's the secret string running through this poem? It's exactly the same idea, really. So when we're exploring the golden thread, we are exploring viewpoint. So you start off with just what's the text about, first of all, what's it about? But then we get into what's the slant, or what's the angle taken by the writer. And if we're not sure, then you start looking at the language choices within the text. And this is not easy. This is going to require quite substantial modelling and what's the word? Thinking aloud.
Yeah, thinking aloud. Yeah,
metacognition. I don't know. You've got to articulate your thought processes.
Yeah, we love the golden thread actually, because this is about the author's intent. What is their viewpoint? And it is really, we tend to do this kind of work with children who might be, we might say working at greater depth. So because it does require a higher level of comprehension, a really nice way to follow through language choices is just to use a highlighter, because then you can see actually which words really do fit with that slant, that viewpoint that we think we are hypothesizing the author has. But we actually think that all children should really be taught how to spot the golden thread, because it's a major component of bias spotting. We do want children to be able to spot, where there is bias, and we can choose potentially simpler text to begin with, and again we can do this by reading aloud and reading with to do that spotting. And as Lindsay was suggesting, doing some of that metacognitive work, actually, how do we know, and doing some of that thinking aloud. So these word choices are suggesting what's it telling us. How is it making me feel, the fact that these words have been chosen and not others? So golden thread is a great one to think about.
As an example, we've got this news story about it's an apparently innocuous, innocent, factual text about an unmanned mission to one of Jupiter's moons, Io. I think it's pronounced literally the letter Io. Maybe someone could tell me. But yeah, it's a factual account. But actually, and forgive me if the author of this text is out there, but it's absolutely riddled with bias is too strong a word, but with viewpoint. So if we read the first sentence, you will find the word incredible, and in the second sentence we've got thrilled, and then by the time we get to the third paragraph, we've got cool pics and tons of data, and it just all sounds very exciting in that way. And actually, when we unpick the language choices all the way through, you get a very strong sense of this is a really important mission. It's first of all introduced as very exciting with the incredible and thrilled, but actually it's the importance of it that comes through as the golden thread. It's a very, very important mission, and one way to check, even just for yourself, really, and we did this, to check that have I spotted it right? Am I making this up? Am I imagining this thread? Is imagine exactly the same facts. I mean, there are clear facts in here: the names, the distances, the frequencies, and so on and so on, the time frames. So imagine all of those facts, but written by a journalist who thought that this unmanned mission was a complete waste of time, and particularly money, because it's taken a lot of time and it's taking a huge amount of money. Imagine that the journalist who wrote this thought that it was a waste of money, and imagine the article that was written by them, and then imagine the vocabulary choices that writer would make. And once you're aware of those sorts of things, then you're into really, really good comprehension land, that you can actually see the difference between somebody who has a positive view and somebody who has a more negative view. And when you're aware of these things, you will see it all the time. You will see it in texts like the reference text we waved at you earlier on, a very clear sense that something is positive or negative at the very least. And you do it by, as Chris said, by highlighting the words that are hinting at that golden thread, and actually like making that invisible golden thread visible with a highlighter will start to make it very, very clear what the thrust is. And as we keep saying in our early summer webinar, we're going to have a look at then how that might lead us to look at sources The other really powerful thing about helping children spot the golden thread in writing that they're reading, is spot the golden thread in their own reading, is that we can then teach them to do that in their own writing, because actually viewpoint is the source of cohesion. So here's a very straightforward plan, that, you know, an unfinished plan for a trip to the British Museum in London, and the circles at the below where children could note down their reactions or details or something along those lines. But just imagine, right, if you stated in the introduction, this was the best day out ever, or the best school trip I've ever been on. If you state that, then every single element that you refer to can refer back to that. So, you know, we waited for the coach in the sunshine, and when it arrived, it was one of those new ones with screens in the headrest, or, you know, I got to sit next to my friend and we told jokes all the way, or something like that. And then when we went to see the mummies, it was hilarious because, I don't know, my friend said one of the mummies looked like the teacher or something like that. And my lunch was amazing because my mum had stuffed it full of chocolate, and then the sculptures were something else was brilliant, and so on and so on. And of course the shop is always the best at the day, isn't it? And then at the end we can refer back to all of that. All these things contributed to it being an amazing day. And simply by stating at the outset what the viewpoint is, and then we can refer back to that all the time. That's where cohesion comes from. There's an awful lot of talk we encounter in circles around, you know, how to teach children to write better, where we try to teach them cohesive devices, which are usually saying things like however and although and additionally and things like that. So largely adverbs and sometimes conjunctions. And actually, putting those in order to achieve cohesion is getting it completely the wrong way around. You have to get the cohesion in the plan, and then the vocabulary for cohesion will come later. Another example, just I'll go through this faster, but we can write a non-chronological report about Roman soldiers if we're assuming we're doing the Romans in our topic. So we can do our research and we can have facts about their sword and their dagger and their javelin and their articulated breastplate and their helmet that covers their cheeks and how they were professionally trained and they were the most successful, blah, blah, blah. We can have all the research that we do in our history lesson, and then we can just write that information. But the best way to achieve cohesion is to state at the outset something like Roman soldier, most successful. Someone's got their sound on. It's quite deafening in my ear. So Roman soldier, the most successful army in the ancient world, something along those lines. And then you can make it clear that one of the contributors to that success was their weaponry, and additionally they had this amazing armor that nobody had ever seen before, and they were the first professionally trained, and their organization, and each of those things refers back to the amazing success of Roman soldiers, the Roman army. Of course, if there's something, and you can particularly see this in a recount, if something just doesn't fit that viewpoint, that's where we can teach children how to use words like however. So it still works. The golden thread is still there, and allows us to teach the contrasting cohesive structures. But always remember, when we're trying to teach cohesion, address the golden thread issue. Find it first. Get children used to the idea in the text that you show them, for example, in first news. State it in the plan, and then teach the cohesive devices afterwards, rather than giving them the language of cohesion first, because then you just get children writing however and additionally, and it doesn't work.
Yeah, that's a big one. And
that was a bit lectury,
really, no, it's really important. And I was just thinking about the however part of it, that you know, that there can be a thread. This is the slant, but you know, obviously in news you are going to get testimonials. You're going to get those quotes where that are reflecting maybe a different point of view, which is what news does. So really important to be doing that. And then also thinking that actually for a piece of writing to be great, you have to have great pieces of writing to be able to to be able to spot those cohesive devices, to be able to spot those slants. So this is just returning to the content domains for the teaching and assessment of reading comprehension that we looked at in the previous session. Just these are the areas that we'll be teaching, obviously not in an isolated way. But the last time when we met, or when you go back to the first session, we looked at retrieval, and obviously there'll be a lot of retrieval work that we'll be doing in relation to any teaching of non-fiction and including the news. We also looked in quite, I think, in depth around making inferences and explaining and justifying with evidence. And this is important, we talked about, because there are inferences to be made, and sometimes we may be neglecting that when thinking about non-fiction, but it's so crucial, as we've seen with the golden thread focus just now. But what we want to look at today is, and really fitting for news stories, is identifying and explaining how content is related and how it contributes to meaning as a whole. Sometimes this one, what does it actually mean? So we just wanted to give some examples of what this might look like.
Yeah, it's such a crucial element of many types of non-fiction. I mean, all of these reference books that we waved about earlier on, it's a component of everything that looks like this, without a doubt. And you see it all the time in any newspaper, but particularly a child-friendly paper like this one. I mean, look at this page. The page is there's a regular feature called the big picture, right? And you've got this tiny little news story, and on your machine, I don't know if you can make it out, but this is in Turkey, so it's not 70 miles per hour, it's 70 kilometers per hour. And the story explains that a genuine car wreck from a car crash, and that is some terrifying, horrific car crash. But the car wreck from a car crash is there as a reminder to stick to the speed limit. And if you only read that story, it would have none of the visceral impact of having the photograph as well. And that is a direct example of how the visual element contributes to the meaning of the text. It doesn't just contribute, it actually enhances, doesn't it? Very, very powerful, very visceral thing. I wonder if other countries have looked into that as a method.
This one would definitely work on me. If I saw this would definitely work on me. So that's the thing, isn't it? That images can make such a fast impact, which is one of the discussions that I'm sure that we're having when we're discussing news stories. So another example, the UK news here. What is that map doing? Why is it there? What's it telling us? And in what way does it relate to the different articles that are surrounding a very simple one, but important for the children to understand. So what are those arrows doing? And great link with geography, obviously.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, we're always told of, and we've had children in our own classes who have no idea where they live in the UK, but also on those pages that Chris was talking about earlier, the international news. It's locating countries all the time, and if you're looking at this stuff every week, your knowledge of the world is and where things are in the world is going to improve, isn't it?
And interest as well, curiosity about those different areas. So I really like this one. Fantastic short article about healthy lunchboxes, and this is great because look, what are these different panels? These three panels doing that supports this article here about healthy lunchboxes. And we were just thinking, just how powerful this is, because to make a healthy lunchbox, we could easily be thinking that it's a difficult thing to do, but by having three very simple panels with very clear graphics showing the ingredients that we may be using, just again very selective, with a concise steps for making. So just three concise steps for the children to be following, really demonstrates that simplicity, and actually this is very attainable. So to make a healthy lunchbox, it's very attainable, and that is definitely communicated through those lovely simple panels, and those images of the children there enjoying it. So, you know, what's it telling us? And that, you know, they're together, able to do this and enjoying the process at the same time. So lots of things that we can be discussing with the children around, you know, what is each part of that page doing, and very exciting. It's just actually in some ways another kind of golden thread in a way. You know, what are the features doing to support the message of the page?
Even the colours of the page, they just sort of shout healthy, fresh and healthy. Yeah, all of this is going to enhance the knowledge building that we were talking about earlier. That you have to build knowledge in order to comprehend more, and comprehending more enables more knowledge building. So we're back to that idea of the virtuous circle, aren't we? Always worth coming back to this idea that comprehension requires knowledge and reading builds knowledge, and that is the virtuous circle. You know. We'll say it again, comprehension, you need knowledge in order to comprehend. Reading, the more you read, the more you will know. And obviously, if you're reading all this stuff, your knowledge of the world is improving, which is going to broaden your knowledge of the world. And when you come to read, you'll be able to read more things, I suppose, is what I'm saying in a hashed up way. Okay.
I mean, it's really, I mean, just actually looking at that, just how important this is. When we were reflecting on this, what about the children who don't get this? You know, we want the children to be getting this. You know, the more we read, the more we know, the easier it is to comprehend what we read. And so we have to be getting children reading about, you know, the world, knowing about the world, and then for that to be feeding into their comprehension is really powerful. And so you know, it is so important that the children are reading frequently and in depth and discussing. As we've been discussing. So we talked about these amazing time-saving comprehension practice resources last time. Just really, you know, great time-saving resources that actually we think are well designed and you know, to save you a lot of time. So, for example, you know, here's the article. And we love this, you know, crossword that is, you know, actually presenting questions as a crossword. The children would just love that. So just a really great way to entice the children into comprehension in a way that is really fun and really engaging. And another example here, we love this one because actually these sorts of questions, you'll recognize these sorts of questions if you are, you know, in assessment territory, if you're end of key stage, because children are practicing those kind of matching questions, the true or false questions, the ordering questions, really good for the children to actually see lots of different formats and using different forms of non-fiction to support that.
And just that practice of reading a question carefully as well. Question 3, which of these is not a point that's made by Dan Simmons? If we could see you, we'd say, put your hand up if you know any children who wouldn't read the not in that sentence.
Yeah, the not, that's a really good one. Yeah, really important for the children to be reading carefully. It's just fantastic practice, isn't it?
Yeah, these are just a list of quite you know, a broad range of questions summarizing you know, response questions, going in, finding information, a little bit of inference, and actually that if you want them, you can print out the pages. So you know, children can do this straight into books, or you can do it onto a format, so that children get used to that. If you like, you can do it straight into the book, but it's quite useful to have those there along with the glossary as well.
And we love the fact that there's lots of comparison, actually comparing articles, which is again very you know, very analytical, very high level challenge for children when they're ready for this.
And these questions, if you look, if you see the sort of blue highlight, find and explain, deduce and infer, analyze, this is high level stuff, right? And we're very grateful, of course, that with these questions you get answer sheets and so on. You know, tabulating information, You know, what is the that last question, what is the purpose? You've got to read the whole article and then summarize it there. That's a really tough one. We're definitely looking at the upper age limit, I think, for this particular task. And it's interesting to see, isn't it, that the range of questions that First User offers is so sort of from pretty basic to really, really high level. And we quite like this, is that these particular format questions, you've got questions about particular words, questions about particular pictures, which will require leafing back through the newspaper about a specific person, about a specific object, and about a specific place. Amazing. And of course, this is what the answers look like, with a lot of detail. So it's not, you could use this as a test if you wanted to, but this is about discussion, isn't it? This is about children having opinions about these, children being interested and inspired as per the three facts that the three statements that Chris highlighted earlier on.
Okay, so we're going to move on to teaching writing now, and Lindsay's talked a little bit about planning for writing using the golden thread. We were just remarking on these images here. We really love seeing the children absorbed in their writing, and we just thought they were lovely illustrations of how children can, how writing for children can be enjoyable, thought-provoking. You see that thought going on, and also tricky. You know, actually, it is a tricky process all at the same time. So how do we help them?
So one of the things that we want to dig into a little bit is this idea of the right register, or the non-fiction voice. And we talk a lot about the non-fiction voice, and of course different kinds of non-fiction have a different voice, but what we're really talking about is how distinct writing non-fiction, the register for non-fiction, is so distinct from fiction. And we'll say a little bit more about that. We'll talk briefly about using non-fiction and news in particular as a source for contextual grammar. Very, very rich for that. And we'll talk a lot about the role of the waggle now. That's either a term you know or you don't. What it actually stands for is what a good one looks like, which is wrong, actually. We use the term all the time. It's a well-known term, but we think, actually, we'll go into this in more detail before we finish, but it should actually be what a good one sounds like, because it's not about what a text looks like, is it? It's about what it sounds like. Read it back. Does it sound right? But waggle's never going to take off. But when we're talking about a waggle, we're talking about a model for the way that we want to write, and we'll dig into that in some detail.
Okay, so anybody who's listened to us talk, we often say this, that language is acquired through imitation. Language is acquired through imitation, and it seems obvious, but it is really important that we repeat this, because what forms of language are we putting in front of the children? What are they imitating? For the children who are avid readers, they're usually avid readers of fiction, and so their heads are going to be full of language models that actually come from stories. So are we encouraging the children, are we putting in front of children other forms, other models, so that they can be imitating those forms as well?
Yeah, there is a real problem with really avid readers writing scientific reports and things like that sound like stories, because that's what they got in their head.
So how do we get the children to develop a journalistic voice? They love becoming the journalist, and they love to put on the news reader style of reading. They love that kind of work. So capitalize on that and get the children rereading. So rereading once they've heard potentially from you as the model, and just performing those pieces, because they do love this, and this is how they will be embedding that language that we want them to be using. And we often say this around poetry, that the language that is internalized through repetition of poetry, how does that happen? It happens because they're hearing those poems, that those nursery rhymes over and over again. And the same thing is true with the journalistic voice. So it's just about doing exactly the same and getting that performance happening. And it doesn't need to be high stakes. It can just be, you know, paired work, as we can see here. The children absolutely love it.
Want to get into this the waggle thing. I just want to talk through a unit of work, a sequence, very quickly, using good old Iron Man, which is an ancient book, and we probably read this when we were children, and still doing the business in schools all the time. I encountered it in the school last week, if I show you this, this is a little bit of chapter 2. If you know the story, and I'm sure a lot of you do, by chapter 2, the Iron Man has made it to the main area where he is for most of the story, and you know he's hungry and he eats metal, doesn't he? So we have this situation, right? So next morning, all the farmers are shouting with anger. Where are their tractors, their earth diggers, their plows, their harrows? They don't know. There's this mystery, and then there's a clue. That things have been eaten, and gradually they find out. Eventually they find out that it's the Iron Man, this iron giant, has been the big clues of giant tooth marks, aren't there? And this makes for a really good source of content for a newspaper story, doesn't it? You can not a real news story, but a news story based in a text, and that's the kind of writing that a lot of schools are doing at the moment. They're taking content from a novel. There's some form of rich text, but obviously the Iron Man doesn't provide a model for a newspaper story because it's written in a fictional style. So if we capture and organise the contents from chapter 2 of the Iron Man, where the farmers are angry, their tractors are disappearing, and they find out that it's the Iron Man who's been eating them, we're going to teach the children how to write a news story about the half-eaten tractors and so on, and how that mystery was solved. So if we're going to teach them how to do that, we don't just need the Iron Man chapter 2. That's where the content's coming from. We also need a model for a newspaper story, and that's why we like this Y-shaped diagram, because at the point of writing the news story, in effect what we're doing is saying we're going to teach you how to write about that in the style of that, and it kind of doesn't matter what the model is about, as long as the language is right. And of course, if you're teaching children to write news stories, which we think is one of the hardest things to teach children to write, having a bank of amazing models for different kinds of journalistic writing in something like First News, very useful. And of course, when you've done that, you can ask them to independently write a newspaper story for a later event in the book, and see if they can do it for themselves. But of course, they can still refer to First News or the news story model that you provided from the outset. Now we flick through First News, and this is an example of a page, and we found this outer space particle mystery, which is nothing to do with the Ted Hughes novel, of course, but it provides the right form, it provides the right register, and it provides the right sentence structures.
So really a good idea to have the children listen and read along with you when presenting an original model. So here, an international group of astronomers have been shocked to discover the second most energetic cosmic ray ever detected on Earth.
So nothing to do with the Iron Man, but if we think back to the story that we're writing a newspaper article about, the farmers, their tractors and machinery had been going missing, and it turns out that an Iron Man has been eating it. We can take this article and rewrite it, pinching language structures, but we can't copy the article because the subject matter is so different. And I'll try and do this quickly. If we look, let's say, so instead of an international group of astronomers, we can say a local group of farmers have been shocked to find their farm machinery and tractors have been destroyed by the largest Iron Man ever discovered in the UK. So it isn't perfect. We could work on that, and we would do this through shared writing. But we're showing the children how to apply this model to that content.
So yeah, so really it's about using the model and getting the children to internalize that model, and showing the children through shared writing how this might look for the particular story that you're looking at together. So it's this kind of imitation that will enable the children to absorb some of those trickier verb tenses that we're hoping that they'll be using in their writing. So, if the children had been imitating just that first paragraph, they would have been experiencing the passive and the present perfect without even realizing it. Because we know, and you will know, that use of verb forms is one of the biggest challenges that children have in writing, all types of writing, to be honest, but news story verb tenses are actually quite difficult. So just imitating it rather than going straight into analysis.
So we're going to show you a couple of slides here that they're very popular with some people and make other people switch off completely. This is an example table that shows all the verb forms in the English primary curriculum. And it's not all the tenses, but it's just the ones in the primary English curriculum. And the coding is to do with year groups. So the pale blue ones are explicitly mentioned in year 2. The perfect form column is year 5 and 6, but the one in the middle, the orangey one, is mentioned in year 3 and 4, the present perfect. Now, but what we would suggest as a form of your own professional development, if you're not confident with verb forms, we won't linger on this, but thinking about a context like a news story, when would you use some of these? So if you look at the perfect form, police had searched for clues, probably not. Certainly police have searched for clues through the night. That sounds quite good, doesn't it? That sounds like a news story. Police are searching for clues. Police were searching for clues through the night. Yeah, that works. And we can try different bits and think which of these would work in a news story. Other bits you'll go, oh, that won't work in a news story, but it would work in a story, in a fiction. And you can do the same thing in a hurry. And forgive me if that's too fast for you. You'll have the deck afterwards, I think Helen said. Also, forgive me if I'm patronising in you and you know all this already. But say we know a lot of schools look at the Second World War as a topic, and there are lots of different ways of writing about evacuation. You can write it as a straight non-crom report, of course with a golden thread, one where it's a great idea, it's a bad idea, or you could write about it as a diary, but you could write about it as a newspaper story written during the Second World War. You could write it as a newspaper story written now, looking back at evacuation, and you can try out these sentences. Which ones would you use? Children have been evacuated from London. That's not, you wouldn't write that now, would you? You'd write that if you were writing a newspaper story in the 1940s. Children will have been evacuated from London. That sounds like a newspaper story that's written like very early in the Second World War, because it hasn't even happened yet. So it's a good way of exploring children are being evacuated. That sounds like more like a broadcast news, doesn't it? As we broadcast, children are being evacuated from London. So trying these out and thinking about the context and where these things will work. And forgive me if that was too fast.
Okay, so we just wanted to return to Charlie and think about how we might tackle those verb forms. And as we said right at the beginning, we want the children just to be enjoying the story first of all, and thinking about beginning with the discussion with, what have we learnt about Charlie? What's been going on? And next we would move on to when this was happening, because in this story there are lots of different verb forms that are in use because of the timing of the stories that come almost to the present. So yeah.
Yeah, so it's absolutely crucial, like Chris said, that read it as a reader first. Don't go, let's look at this text and underline all the verbs, because that's a recipe for disengagement. So in order to engage with the story, isn't it funny? What do we find interesting? All the rest of it, and then we can get into, rather than say, no, let's underline the verbs. It's like Chris said, when did these things happen? A cheeky monkey named Charlie has escaped. Now, when? So it didn't say a cheeky monkey named Charlie escaped, because that sounds like it's done and dusted. He has escaped. He's still ongoing. He's escaped and he's still on the loose, isn't he? And this happened. That it's an ongoing thing. He's setting off. That hasn't ended. He's setting off. Now we go back into the past, don't we? He used to live, but now he's escaped. So so we can dig into the verb forms. We don't have to go through and name them if you don't want to. That's not the point. We're looking at the function of the verbs, and something happened while he was being relocated. So in the process of doing one thing, he did something else. So we've got a continuous and then a simple past. And look at this, going back to that first, has escaped. Willie Heffernan, the sanctuary's owner, has urged. So it's happened in the past, but he's not finished urging. The urging continues. He has urged to keep an eye out. That's an ongoing thing, isn't it? Keep an eye out. He says it is likely to be looking. He's looking. He's not stopped. He's looking for a mate. The monkey is shy. It's happening right now. That's not changing. The monkey is shy in the current form. And of course, he's still on. We love that last sentence. When first he's went to rest, Charlie was still on the loose. We need to find out if Charlie's been caught. But he was still on the loose. That's an ongoing situation. So really talking about when did this happen? Is it ongoing? Has it finished? That's the way to discover how verbs work.
We were actually looking back at this Charlie story. What a fantastic waggle. What a fantastic model for any escape story. We were thinking escaping crocodiles, escaping elephants, escaping teachers. Actually fantastic structure for the children to be using. So what's really powerful is that in newspapers there are many different stories that are obviously happening at different times, and that is an advantage if we're wanting the children to become more fluent in their use of tense forms. So this example of the London Zoo animal count, the animal count actually happens every single year. So this is a perfect example of lots of present tense verb forms being used here. Whereas something like this, which is a fossil story, it focuses very much on the very distant past, and as well as a recent discovery. And so a great one to be exploring past tense in slightly different forms. And this Tetra story is a story that's just happened, but it also includes some flashback. So the flashback being that Willis began playing when he was 11. And so again, just that delving into lots of different articles means that the children will become more fluent if they hear and perform these texts over and over again.
And we've seen the note about us running over. I think we had a different time in our heads, but we'll go quickly as we can through the end. Just to linger on the Tetra story very quickly, as an example of contextual grammar teaching, I'll go through this super fast. So if you're interested in this sort of thing, we're definitely teaching grammar and punctuation in context, the way to go, without a doubt. So we've got a hyphen for a compound word, as opposed to a dash for a way of linking to related independent clauses. We've got parenthetical commas. We've got a fantastic cohesive fronted adverbial where the it refers to something in it. The it is referring to a previous sentence. We've got a subordinate clause beginning with an if, which children often find very difficult, and a very different fronted adverbial until 2021. Very effective. Again, children don't naturally use it until, it would seem. We've got parenthetical brackets this time. We've got lots of different sentences starting with different conjunctions. We've got punctuated direct speech. We got a totally different fronted adverbial. We got starting with an as. We got starting with once. We've got another until. Amazing range of grammar. That's just a selection from that one article. Contextual grammar is the way to go, without a doubt. A very, very specific way of teaching writing is to teach children how to write a newspaper.
Okay, this is a really exciting experience for the children. We're pretty sure that a lot of you will have experienced creating that newsroom in the classroom that totally motivates the children when they're experiencing it. And obviously, what we would want to be happening is that children are experiencing different roles. So the writing, the graphics, the editing, the page organization, and actually having a turn at each of these roles if you are allocating them. They really love deadlines. So if you say, oh, this needs to be published by 3 o'clock, they're going to work towards those deadlines, and they're highly motivated by them. And there's no more obvious or important way for the children to be using editing as for a newsroom setting, because editing, it is without those edits we wouldn't get great news. So we just wanted to share with you we didn't realize that this existed before, but a fantastic newspaper guides, 2 parts, with the first one being a guide for the teacher, and the second part the guide for pupils to be using. And just to give you a taster of what this looks like. So the contents of the teacher guide, you can see what exactly is going on there. You can look at it in your own time, and also case studies of schools that have used these guides to create their own papers. We really love chapter 8, the ethics page, which so important to be sharing this with children so that they understand what needs to go into good reporting. So really important to share that.
And these are a few pages from the guide for students, for pupils. This is tips for writing headlines, and then a practice page for creating headlines. We love that. And following that pattern, tips for how to write the lead paragraph, followed by a page for practicing writing the lead paragraph.
And we really love this, just general tips for how to compose a newspaper article. Included this inverted pyramid, which shows children how an article is structured with an example next to it. Fantastic, because this is very distinctive to newspapers.
Yeah, no other form of writing takes that structure. So as Chris said, editing, it really is the secret to great writing. And crucially, we think these are the 2 keys actually. Don't ask children to edit because you just want them to edit. They have to have a purpose. Why do we need to make it good? Who's going to read it? Also, don't leave the editing to the end. It's really daunting, even for adults. Edit as you go. Give it a once over at the end, but you need to have edited as you go through. Always be thinking about who your audience is. Constantly, not at the end, constantly read it aloud. Does it sound right? You'll know if it sounds right if you've done, as Chris said, lots of reading aloud of news stories. You'll know if does it sound right or does it sound like a fairy story, and constantly weighing up is every word. Every word counts, not just your golden thread words, but is that the right preposition?
And how does all of this editing relate to the newsroom? Here we are, so some newsroom specifics, and I think these speak for themselves. So editing in general and how they relate to the newsroom.
Okay. And apologies if we've gone over. We were actually aiming for 5:15 with a view to take questions after. But Helen, we hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Chris and Lindsay. And I hope you didn't feel like you had to rush through that last bit too much. It was an absolutely fantastic session. So much to think about, so much to take away, and we are really grateful. If anybody would like to ask any questions at this point, then we would be delighted to hear from you. You could either unmute yourself and wave your hand about so we can see you, and then you could speak, or you could type your question into the sidebar. Either way is fine. Does anybody have anything they would like to raise with Chris and Lindsay? Yes, there is indeed a recording that will be shared, Tony, tomorrow. If you scroll up this chat thread a little bit, you'll see a list of everything that you'll be sent tomorrow, which will include the slides and some useful links and various other bits and bobs. So yes, that will come out to you tomorrow. You're welcome. Yeah, I found it particularly fascinating, the range of verb forms that get used in just one single tiny news story, which it just isn't something that happens in fiction, is it? Fiction tends, you're either, I mean, well, you're increasingly in the present tense, aren't you, these days? But yes, there's one tense, and it doesn't hop around like that. And when you think about how many tenses the children have to learn by the end of Key Stage 2, getting them all in some kind of model text is really tricky. That's certainly what we've found.
Yeah, that's why we kind of say to start with straightforward personal recount before moving on to trying something as difficult as a new story.
Oh, here we go. Here's a question from Caroline. When working with a class, does each child have their own newspaper, particularly if they are leafing through? Oh, that's almost kind of a budget question, isn't it, rather than a teaching question?
Yeah, we haven't encountered any. I mean, you'll be better, or other colleagues at First News will be better versed with this, because we don't work for First News, as it were. But we've only encountered schools having kind of a few and having group discussion where like pairs of children have their newspaper. Where people do things whole class, it's tended to be a digital subscription, looking at something on the screen at the front of the room, and having like things like the news roundup pages that Chris was sharing earlier, that sort of printed out.
We do find with the resources, for example, if you're going to use the resources with a class, it is really useful to have a copy of the particular article that they're looking at in front of them, so you can do a shared reading so that they get familiarity with it before they start tackling the questions. And the same is true, you can copy obviously and reproduce individual articles from the paper, but for that lovely tactile leafing through experience, I think you just have one or two copies that you share around.
Yeah.
Here we go. Have I missed any questions? Here we go. And that is true what Naomi says as well, even when the news isn't current. So if you're looking at a paper that's 2 or 3 weeks old, or even older than that, there's still so many teaching opportunities from it.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, and because some news stories are very, very like of the moment, but
sure,
but some things, like some of the science things will be intriguing quite a long time later, I think.
Exactly, and Charlie the monkey, he could have escaped any time.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's timeless, Charlie the monkey.
That was a January story, and first week of February there's another escaped monkey in another part of the UK. So
people are just not keeping tabs on their monkeys, are they? Yes, that's true what Kate says there. If you've got the digital subscription, that's one of the advantages, is that you can download individual articles, you can clip things out, and you can share those with the class. It gives you quite a lot of flexibility.
Yeah, I think that'd be really powerful, the clipping and actually just analysing, when it comes to that, actually it'd be really good. And just as the model, it's great to have that opportunity.
Okay, well, if nobody else has got any questions, then yes, no worries, Naomi. We'll catch up with you later. It just remains for me to say once again then, Chris and Lindsay, thank you so much for an incredibly absorbing presentation. I certainly really, really enjoyed it, and I hope everyone who attended has loads to take away and think about. Do keep an eye out in your inboxes tomorrow for that email which will come through, which will be full of information and resources for you to check out. If it doesn't come through, maybe have a look at your spam folder, but we will certainly be in touch tomorrow. And of course, there is the third in this series of webinars, which I know that Chris and Lindsay are really looking forward to next term, which will really hone in on that critical thinking aspect of engaging with nonfiction and engaging with the news, and which we know is so important for the children these days. So yes, thank you everyone. Very, very grateful. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.